Chapter 9, July 17, 1963, night. Tonight at dinner, after we worry ourselves sick talking about Elias, we dish all about the garden club. Ever since old man Adams went and died last month, the garden club has held a bunch of meetings to figure out what to plant on his land. But Mama, Uncle Bump, and me agree. Their meetings are nothing but a bunch of hooey. This garden belongs to all Cucachuians, Negro and white, I say, and swallow my last bite of beans. No matter how much they quibble about what to plant, you can bet they agree on one thing, Mama says. What's that? Uncle Bump asks. He wipes his face with an old piece of towel. Us Negroes won't never share the land, she says, and sips her water. Uncle Bump laughs, not because what Mama says is funny, but because it's true. Why don't they know old man Adams left the land for all of us? I ask. I walk over to the stove and scrape one last spoonful of beans off the bottom of the pot. Because the mayor and the sheriff lied, Addie Ann. They told folks old man Adams wrote in his will the land is just for whites, Uncle Bump says. Course, there's a couple rumors starting to spread, but you know white folk, Mama says. They believe whatever's most easy. Well, we should tell 'em, I say and sit back down, and that's when Mama gives me one of her ain't you got no manners, sucking her breath expressions. I reckon it's because I'm talking with my mouth full of beans. I can't say I see what the big deal is. If you got to chew and talk, why not do both at the same time? But I don't feel like picking a crow with Mama, so I swallow. That's better, she says. Anyway, the Reverend says the truth is going to make itself known. Well, when? I ask Mama. When is it going to make itself known? Whenever it's supposed to, she tells me, as if that clears everything right up. Uncle Bump pulls his harmonica out of his pocket, says goodnight, and leaves out the side door. Of course, while Mama and me clean up from supper, we go straight back to fretting about my brother. 5 days gone since Elias ran off, and we can't go 3 minutes without thinking about him. The next morning, soon as Mama and I get to the Tate's house, she goes on upstairs while I pour some milk into the tin bowl to set out back for Flapjack. I'm trying to teach my cat to wait for me till I'm ready to go home. A couple days ago, I showed Mrs. Tate the bowl I'd brought and asked her if she'd mind. Training a cat, she said and laughed. Now that's a good idea. Most folks think you can only do that with dogs. Sure, I'll donate milk to the cause. This morning, after I place the bowl outside, I step back into the Tate's kitchen. Mama shuffles down the stairs and plops Ralphie into my arms. I've got to dust this house floorboards to ceiling before the garden club meeting. You got to take them on your own, she says. At once, I feel a rush of excitement because I'm going to prove I'm more than capable. Mama tells me after I give Ralphie walking lessons, lunch, stories, and a nap, I better give him a bath. Don't forget to check his bottom, she says. Later, while the bathwater runs, I take a good look at myself in the Tate's washroom mirror. The last time I saw myself in a big mirror was more than a month ago in old man Adams' place. I gather the cloth of my dress tight behind me and see what Mama's been telling me. It's true. My hip bones decided to spread apart from each other, but like butter. Mama says it means I'm starting to get a figure. And I figure a figure is a good thing because Delilah's already got one, even though she's going into 6th grade, and all the boys think she's the cat's meow. I'm still noticing my new figure, and I forget all about Ralphie till I feel his little hands press against my legs. Wouldn't you know it, when I look down, I see that boy took 3 rolls of toilet paper out the washroom cabinet. Now he's got himself wrapped up like an Egyptian mummy, and he's trying to wrap me too. Stop that, I say, and try not to laugh, but Ralphie just looks at me with a goofy grin. I turn off the bath water and gather up the toilet paper. It's so soft. Truth be told, I'm tempted to fold it up and take it home, because ever since Uncle Bump stopped working, all we've got to use in our outhouse are the free department store catalogs that come in the mail. But I've got no bag to save toilet paper in, so I stuff it into the trash can seconds before Mrs. Tate wanders into the washroom, looking for her lipstick. I can't imagine what you and your poor mother are going through with your brother gone, she says as she rummages through the washroom drawer. Well, I suppose working hard is the only way to get by. Yes, ma'am, I say, and she's right about it, too. After Mrs. Tate finds her lipstick, she leaves. But the whole time I'm bathing Ralphie, pinning on his diaper, and dressing him in the sailor outfit, I can't stop thinking about my brother. Not till I inhale. Usually after a bath, that boy smells sweet as a lace cookie. But today Ralphie doesn't smell anything but rotten, so I carry him back to the changing table and clean him up. Then I take him down to the kitchen and set him in the high chair. Woof, woof, I say, and hold up the new stuffed dog that Mrs. Tate bought him. A few days ago, I hear Mr. Tate yell at his wife for spending too much money all the time. But if you ask me, buying this dog was worth it. Ralphie loves it. Now he grabs it out of my hands and hugs it tight, just as Mrs. Tate comes into the kitchen. She's all dressed up, special for the garden club meeting. She wears a straw hat with a giant white bow. Her black hair shines flat down her back with the highway after a rain. When the doorbell rings, I turn my kitchen chair and peek into the Tate's living room. And there's Honey and Jimmy's mama, Mrs. Worth, strolling through the front door. Laying eyes on Mrs. Worth, I feel a scratch in my throat, a scratch that burns. She's got on a yellow hat that matches her hair. Today, there's nothing funny about her hat, but even if she had plastic frogs tied to the brim, you bet I wouldn't smirk. Next, Mrs. Springer arrives. She's got a newspaper rolled up under her arm, and instead of a hat, she wears a yellow pencil tucked behind her ear. Mama says Mrs. Tate would never be friends with a single lady like Miss Springer if Miss Springer didn't do so much good. But each year, Miss Springer decorates the float for the Thanksgiving Day parade. What's more, she's raising money to build a library here in Cuckoo. Mama tiptoes in the living room and sets down a plate of ginger snaps for the prim and proper members of the garden club, who act like they're planning a charitable event, not a cold-blooded crime. Then she hurries back into the kitchen. Soon Mr. Mudge comes through the front door. Mama and me were surprised to see him here. He's a very busy man. When it comes to doing business in Kukuchu, everyone knows he wears the breeches. He not only owns a farm the size of 2 football fields, but also the corner store. With old man Adams dead and buried, Mr. Mudge is now the richest man alive. At least in Kukuchu he is. What with the corner store being the only grocery shop in town, he is what you might call a regular monopoly. And if that's not enough to put pennies in his pockets, he's preparing for the grand opening of another shop in Muscadine County. Now Mrs. Worth sits on the sofa and asks him all about it. Ain't Muscadine County an awful far drive? 90 miles straight down the highway, Mr. Mudge says, but I'd drive 190 to open my shop there. Why's that? Mrs. Worth asks and reached for a ginger snap. All kinds of show business folks are moving to Muscadine County. In a couple of years, that place will be the new Hollywood. Now's the time to invest. I reckon that given all of his business experience, Mr. Mudge is going to tell folks exactly what to plant on Old Man Adams' land. But get this, when at long last the meeting starts, he tells the 7 ladies and the mayor something else entirely. Gardens? Who needs gardens, he says. Why, if you need a garden, plant one in your own yard. Well, that's easy for Mr. Mudge to say. The dirt round his house isn't dry and crumbly like the dirt round ours. Plus, his front yard takes up half the town. He's got plenty of room to plant a whole variety. And he's got enough vegetables to eat and to sell. Now the rest of the Kukuchuians want the chance to do the same. Folks don't just want to eat the vegetables they grow. They want to sell them at the farmer's market in Frankendale. But I reckon Mr. Mudge doesn't care a hoot about that. Picture this, he tells the garden club members. That land could be the perfect spot for our new private high school. You know, the Supreme Court is coming down rather hard in the area of integration, he says. I don't have to tell you, it's a dog-eat-dog kind of world. Then Mr. Mudge starts talking about how folks on my side of town are getting uppity. All of a sudden, my breath turns light and stiff like an egg white beat too long, and I can't imagine how Mama's going to fill their glasses because her hands are trembling while she takes the pitcher of iced tea out of the fridge. But Mama takes a deep breath and walks back into the living room. I mix up some dough for Ralphie to play with while I listen to the rest. They're gaining rights at our expense, Mrs. Worth says, as if Mom and me are in the house. If we give them a mixed education, next they'll want to swim in the same pool as our kids. Well, of course I want to jump in that pool behind the White High School. One time, Delilah dragged me all the way there to peek at it through the wire fence. The water looked so cool and blue. But I know I've got as much of a chance of ever splashing in that pool as I do of kissing Cool Breeze Huddleston, just about none. If we use the land to build a new high school, a private sort of school, it'll protect our children. And when the White High School lets the coloreds in, Mr. Mudge says, by then it'll be too late to tell the coloreds, scram. But I have to say, I'm shocked to hear Mr. Mudge talk this way, and I reckon the mayor doesn't like what Mr. Mudge says either. With the greatest respect, sir, the mayor says, but the Supreme Court passed a law that violates our state's right to educate the children of Mississippi as we see fit. The mayor takes a ginger snap off the serving plate. Fortunately, I'm in charge of the schools in Kukuchu, so I'm not going to follow that law. Integration here? The mayor takes a bite. That ain't nothing but 1,000 never-evers. All of a sudden, Mrs. Worth shouts, the tea! Watch it! My breath got shorter and shorter till it's barely there. I see Mom in the living room, crunched up as small as a cricket, hands shaking while she tries to scrub the spilled tea out of the white carpet with her rag. Sorry, ma'am, Mama says. Mrs. Tate looks at Mama but doesn't say a word. But Mrs. Worth turns to Mrs. Tate and says, that maid's too old. Just look at her. Time for a new one. My eyes narrow to slits. When Mrs. Worth turns away to grab another ginger snap, Mrs. Tate's other friend, Miss Springer, stares at Mama till Mama lifts her eyes from the carpet. Then Miss Springer waves her hands in front of her face. With that one gesture, she tells Mama the spill. It's fuss and feathers. No big deal. While Mama runs past me in the kitchen to wet her rag, I see she's got a tear in her eye, like she's wondering if she's too old for this work. But she's also got a smile on her lips, like she can't stop thinking about the wave from Miss Springer. Chapter 10. July 18, 1963, afternoon. At long last, the world's most precious carpet is clean, so Mama runs upstairs to iron the linens. I give Ralphie a ball of dough to play with. Then I sit down beside him and peek into the living room. I've got to pay real close attention so I can fill Mama in later. The mayor picks up where he left off. What we need is a garden that will provide free food for the community and extra cash for those who need it. Nobody can beat that. Well, we can't plant a dang thing till next May anyhow, Mr. Mudge says. That's when Miss Springer chimes in. Miss Springer has the Delta Daily crossword puzzle open on her lap. She looks plainer than a wheat roll, but I can tell you one thing. There's nothing dull about what she has to say. Wait till next year? Hogwash. Just because most folks in the Delta are afraid of a cool season garden doesn't mean we have to be. My grandpa always planted a fall garden. He always told me, Violet, thank your lucky stars we live up here in the northern part of the state. We're spared the worst of the Mississippi sun. Why, we can go ahead and plant our garden next week. Next week, Mrs. Kate gasps. She throws her hands over her mouth like she just won the 4th of July cake decorating contest. The mayor stands. Why, a fall season garden is an excellent idea. We're Kukuchu after all, not Bramber or Weaver. We're not afraid to be on the leading edge. But Mr. Mudge wants his advice followed, and I can see why. That man has what you call farming experience. If you're going to insist on a garden, then I might propose an altogether different sort, he says. It's impossible to be an expert in everything now. Better to pick one crop and do it right, like Henry Ford did with the Model T. In my personal opinion, due to their nutrition value and all-around robust flavor, turnip greens is the only wise choice. Or garlic, Mrs. Worth says. We could plant all garlic. Or butter beans, Mrs. Tate says. I can see by the way Mrs. Tate's opened her blue eyes real wide that she's proud of her idea. I read in the magazines that movie stars like Audrey Hepburn and all the ladies in New York City eat a steady diet of butter beans, she says. They make butterbean soup, butterbean sauce, and even butterbean pie. Mr. Mudge chuckles. With all due respect, Mrs. Tate, you can't believe everything you read, he says. Besides, Mr. Adams didn't leave any butterbean seeds in his shed. None at all. That's when Miss Springer pushes her horn-ribbed glasses further on her nose. Well, Mr. Mudge, since you've already taken stock of what seeds Mr. Adams left in his garden cabin, perhaps you might be so kind as to make a quick list of the inventory? With that, Miss Springer tears out the crossword puzzle page from the Delta Daily and hands it to Mr. Mudge, along with the pencil that was resting behind her ear. Mr. Mudge leans over to the coffee table and scrawls the list of seeds onto the torn sheet of newspaper. When he's finished, he slams Miss Springer's pencil on top of it, folds his arms across his chest, and stares out the window. Miss Springer examines the list written on the crossword puzzle page. Then she says, Mr. Mudge, Mr. Mayor, we ladies have a plan. According to this list, Mr. Adams left a wide variety of seed in his garden cabin. We can't plant tomatoes, though. Too tender in the August heat. And no watermelon. Wouldn't be ready before the frost. Miss Springer turns to Mrs. Worth and Mrs. Tate. Sorry to say, girls, there aren't any garlic or butterbean seeds in his garden cabin either, she says. And I reckon this is the start of a real hullabaloo. Regarding the rows, Miss Springer says, there's only one way to figure it. We will plant 68 purple hull peas, 19 string beans, 23 cabbage, 45 cratter peas, 53 mustard greens, 32 crooked neck squash, 49 collards, 36 kale, 47 black-eyed peas, 41 button squash, and well, I reckon 4 turnip greens wouldn't hurt. And there you all have it, Mrs. Worth says, as if she knew it all along. Mrs. Tate nods. One thing's clear. Both Mrs. Worth and Mrs. Tate will gladly give up rows of garlic and butter beans to have a garden planted by a lady. And it seems Mr. Mudge and the mayor don't have the nerve to disagree. I want to stand and cheer for Miss Springer, but she's got so much grit. But now Ralphie throws his stuffed doggy into the floor, and it's near supper time, so I set the water to boil and drop some noodles in the pot. Well, of course I'd be more than happy to donate the labor to plant the garden, Mr. Mudge says, but surely that's not enough to keep a garden growing. Who's going to pick the weeds? Who's going to fertilize? Water? Take it from me, you can't grow a garden without hiring field hands to tend it for months after the planting. Can't, couldn't, shouldn't. That's all we hear from you, Mr. Mudge. Miss Springer shakes her head. We are Cuckoochuians. We can do anything we set our minds to. Well, of course, Mr. Mudge says. I don't mean to imply we can't, but... Ralphie squirms. I know I should read him a story, but I can't stand to miss a word. So I pick up his doggy, wet its notes in the tap, and stick it in the sugar bowl. Then I hand it back. Just as I had hoped, Ralphie stuffs his sweet doggy's nose into his mouth and chews on it like a pacifier, while I wait to hear what Miss Springer will say next. But the minutes pass, and Miss Springer doesn't say boo. It's so quiet I can hear the bubbles burst in the pot. At long last, the mayor asks, just what do you propose, Miss Springer? Just this, she said. We, the garden club, accept Mr. Mudge's most kind offer of hiring field hands to plant our garden. Mr. Mudge snarls. After that, Miss Springer says, we'll call on the bored, pot-bellied men this side of town. They'll meet up at the garden a couple evenings a week to pull weeds and water. They'll shed pounds and revitalize themselves by reuniting with the land. They'll form a weeding and watering committee. Miss Springer stops and stares at Mrs. Tate and Mrs. Worth. Your husbands will be the committee leaders, she says. Well, how on earth am I going to get my husband to work our garden, Mrs. Tate asks. You just tell him you see his waistline growing faster than his hothouse bulbs, and I guarantee you 100% he'll be weeding the acres by hand every night of the week. As for your husband, Miss Springer says to Miss Worth, ever since he switched from firefighting to lumber, he's lost that gleam in his eye. Get him to show up at the garden just once, and I promise you'll find a changed man. Mrs. Tate and Miss Worth nod like Miss Springer could be onto something. Then Miss Springer takes her pencil off the table and slides it back behind her ear. So you see, she says to Mr. Mudge, that's the way it's fixin' to be. You sure make a lot of noise for a librarian, Mr. Mudge says. Miss Springer huffs out such a strong breath and knocks the curl dangling in front of her forehead off to the side of her face. Well, I'm just joking, he says, but there is one problem you've overlooked. Miss Springer raises her eyebrows. Weeding and watering is Negro work, he says. Now Miss Springer's fuming. I'll have you know, she says, my daddy and his daddy before him did that work. So did your daddy. If he hadn't, you wouldn't be where you are today. And that's when I hear the sizzling sound. I run to the stove. Each noodle's the size of a live oak trunk. I've got just enough time to feed Ralphie supper before the garden club meeting finishes, and it's time for Mama and me to head back home. Later, when Mama and I get outside, I see the milk and Flapjack's dish is almost finished. Mama waits while I clean out the bowl with the Tate's hose. Then I tweet, click, click, and wouldn't you know it, Flapjack leans over the neighborhood's fence into the Tate's yard. The milk worked. I kiss his furry head, and together we all walk home.